So there's a couple things we need to bring up. I mean, first of all, the word Christianity is loaded. So when you say Christianity, we think of certain concepts. And what I'm saying in my book is get those concepts out of your head, because Christianity, the way we think of it, did not exist until 200 years or so after Jesus.
Hi, this is Frank Schaeffer, and you are watching and or listening to my podcast, In Conversation with Frank Schaeffer. And it's live on Facebook first, then goes to YouTube, and then all the places podcasts live. If you happen to like In Conversation with Frank Schaeffer or this particular conversation, please share it and like it in the interweb sense and help us promote. And today I'm talking with a friend of mine, Michael Camp. And Michael does things that we're going to get into in a minute, but he's the author of a forthcoming book, Breaking Bad Faith, as well as Confessions of a Bible Thumper, My Homebrewed Quest for a Reasoned Faith, and also Craft Brewed Jesus. But I wanted to ask you before I get into it, because I got the PDF of the book.
Yes.
And so I don't know whether it's out yet or when it will be available.
Oh, it's launching on July 4th, Independence Day.
So basically,
Bad Faith on July 4th.
We can talk about it being out.
Right. Yeah.
So the book again is Breaking Bad Faith. It is by Michael Camp. He's the author of other books, and we're going to be talking about your new book, which I have read and made some notes on and all the rest of it. So the only difficulty is because it's a PDF file and not in front of me with notes on the page, I'm going to be clicking to the book and minimizing you a little bit without hopefully losing you. But what I want to talk about first is just the contents and introduce people to what this is about. Essentially, it's sort of, I guess I'd put it this way, it's about the fake news version of Christianity in the sense of going through uncovering the violent sacrificial religion, how religious myths and frauds work, the major myths versus reality, the two-faced God of popular theology, and a deep dive into the more violent parts of the Old Testament, the erroneous way people view the Bible, the problem with a transactional God, violence in popular theology and American culture, really, really important chapter. The myth of redemptive violence, really important chapter and kind of unique. I think you've done something, broken some new ground in that particular chapter. The roots of peace, reclaiming the path of peace, modern peace movements as our guide, breaking bad faith for the sake of peace, and then endnotes and so forth and so on. So there's a lot here to talk about. But let's first just start by introducing you. When people ask me what I do, I automatically assume they're sort of thinking of a career portrait. But in fact, what I do is a lot of childcare for my grandchildren and work at my relationship with my wife. And somewhere down the list, I'm an author and I earn my living as a writer. But let's take a dive, first of all, into you. You've had a long journey. You come out of an evangelical missionary background. You were a missionary yourself. Let's first, before we get into the book, talk about your journey in the way that I do in some of my memoir books, like Crazy for God, where I talk about being raised as an evangelical missionary kid in a small evangelical community called La Brie Fellowship, and then how, in my story, my dad got well known, became a big-time American religious figure. I kind of was his nepotistic sidekick for a while, then left that movement by degrees, no big overnight conversion. And now I'm 70 years old. I'll be 71 in August. And I'm at such a different place in my life now than I was, say, when I was 21.
Right.
That when I think of myself then, it's almost as if I'm reading a story about a completely different character with whom I have almost no emotional connection. And I know you've had a similarly dramatic journey. So before we get into this book, tell me about your journey.
Yeah, sure. It's a long journey. I probably got introduced to evangelical Christianity when I was a teenager. My mom joined the local Baptist church down the street and became very excited about it. And all these people in the youth group, et cetera, started witnessing to me. I'll date myself. I went to a big Jesus festival in 1972 at age 15 called Explo 72 in Dallas. Got introduced to, Jesus rock music, folk music, Billy Graham, all the hype about the rapture and Jesus is coming back soon and all this stuff. And, and your formative years, you kind of like take this stuff in, and who am I to question this stuff, man? Mom is all excited about this, maybe this is true, and I'm kind of messed up and need some help. So I kept on thinking about it. Later on in college, I actually, became a born again Christian, but I really had a warped view of God. It was just like right from the start, and because I was buying into these narratives that I thought were true. Later on, I found out they really weren't. And so, it was like I went down into the evangelical swimming pool, ran down to the deep end, found the tallest diving board and dove in and, became a missionary to Africa. I also had a vision to help the poor. So I was doing community development projects for a Christian aid agency to start. But the agenda was to convert Muslims. And so it was my first experience, overseas, working with another culture as a Christian missionary. And I had mixed feelings, but the evangelical bubble is just very strong. It's hard to get out of it. And anytime you try to deviate, there's voices that are telling you, no, that's not Orthodox Christianity. So, I was starting to doubt the doctrine of hell. I could say I started deconstructing then, but it was deconstruction light. And, but when you live with people, grow to love them in a missions context overseas, in this case, in Somalia with Muslim people, and you grow to love them, all of a sudden these theological ideas, wait a minute, this doesn't really make sense in the real life here on the ground. Maybe I should revisit this. So, I continued on into the charismatic movement. I actually went to L'Abri too for a week.
In Switzerland?
Yeah, in Switzerland on the way home from Somalia.
When might have that been?
That would have been 1984. So I think.
Okay, so I would have left the community by then. I'd be in the States at that point. But in 84, I'm still part of the program. Dad and I are on the road. And
yes,
he died in 84.
Yeah.
But we, up until that year, we had been on the road together. Anyway, I have one thing just to go back. You were in Africa for quite some time, because I think it was 20 years or something as in the book.
No, I lived in Africa a total of 7 years.
Oh, 7. Okay.
Yeah. So I went a couple years, got married, and then my wife and I went back, and we stayed there 5 years.
Yes.
But I was in the evangelical missions movement probably 12, 14 years, just, working either overseas or working in agencies, mission agencies in the States. So, or getting trained, going to Fuller Seminary or U.S. Center for World Mission and Pasadena, stuff like that. So, but anyways, then later on, I really experienced spiritual abuse in some churches, and in my experience on the second time I went to Africa, and I began to rethink things more, and eventually started to deconstruct things. And it was a gradual process at first. It kind of gradually went along, and then finally it came to a head, and it really broke probably about 18 years ago. So I really broke with the church and just, called myself a done now. I'm done with church. And
how is that all playing out with your family?
Good question. Not good.
Well, give us a little bit of the story of who all, different reactions and so forth.
Well, my wife wasn't happy. We weren't on the same page. So we had a lot of conflict over that. My parents weren't happy when I first really came out and started after my first book, especially when when I published my first blog, and things go public, then they find out what's going on. And no, it was really hard. My parents especially, Dad was a strict Calvinist, and Mom is very, very strong fundamentalist Christian. So they basically, their pastor told him, oh, Michael's a apostate, you guys have failed and you're raising your son. You guys need to rethink things. You guys are not doing good. And they tried their best to try to bring me back. And of course, that wasn't going to happen. And very close-minded about things and not really willing to sit down and really understand what I was going through.
And what about with your work, in the sense that you've now obviously would have changed how you were earning your living if you were fundamentalist mission?
Right. In about 2003, I basically got out of the professional Christian mission agency business and started doing marketing for some Microsoft partners, companies that sell Microsoft products or business software. And I got into that. So I did that for the rest of my career. I just retired earlier this year. So I did that for about 19 years. So kind of got a regular job. And then on the side, started writing books and doing some other things, podcasting, etc. So
yeah. The question I have is, in terms of connections with other people in what I would call the kind of post-evangelical movement, there's folks like me and people like Brian McLaren and so forth. And then there's this book, The Making of Biblical Womanhood, which I interviewed the author here, doing similar kind of things that you do in your book, when you talk about a kind of a more authentic version of Christianity. But all this work, including yours, brings up a basic philosophical question in terms of this kind of departure process being incremental. It just seems to me that you are on a similar path to the author, Beth Allison Barr, who wrote The Making of Biblical Womanhood. Mm-hmm. She dealt with that subject in a similar way, that you're dealing with a much broader subject in your book. But I always look at people like Beth or you, and other than professional connections, because I think she's a professor at a university, but also, I believe, married to a pastor as well. So kind of still facing the judgment within her own community for that. Like you, in some ways, still declaring herself as a Christian, certainly not an evangelical. But I always wondered with Beth or with you or with other people, if you're not on a path that in the end will end up somewhere else. And I look at my own background, and I wrote a book once called Patience with God, which was sort of my attempt to bridge where I came from, where I felt I was going. And it's one of those books I look back on with no regret. It is where I was at that time, but it was a snapshot of someone who would wind up finally writing something called Why I'm an Atheist Who Believes in God. And, the next book after that, there won't be one. But if there was, if I was trying to describe my belief, it would certainly not be in the area of, some sort of vestigial Christianity. So I look in your book, and what I read through there is that you're still trying to separate out. And when I say still, I don't mean that in a pejorative sense. You are bravely separating out what I would call the kind of detriment and mistakes and fallacy of church history and theology away from the person of Christ. Obviously, every Christian figure worth following or listening to has done this for 2,000 years. It hasn't worked yet. And at a certain point, the argument is, well, Christianity hasn't been tried yet. You're not that, you don't do that. But at a certain point, you have to say, well, look, maybe who Jesus really was, or what he really said, or what he really stands for is no longer interesting, because this is a movement that has failed across the board and produced a great deal of inhumanity. And there must be seeds of that inhumanity in the movement. Much as you argue with people on the far left who talk about Marxism, and you at a certain point, you're justified in saying, well, where has it produced anything in terms of the theory of Marx? So maybe he wasn't a monster, but why is every regime that's ever come out of it monstrous? And I would charge, I think the same thing happens with Hindu nationalism and Modi in India. If this is what it's cracked up to be, why does this keep happening? Or the Saudi version of Islam. It seems to me that the problem is bigger than simply trying to get back to the authentic voice of the founder of Christianity or anything else, and has to do with human nature itself, which is semi-evolved, backward, primitive, violent. And the problem with evangelicals is not, and I'm being a little facetious here, that they're evangelicals who get the person of Christ wrong. The problem is we're about 10,000 years ahead of time in our evolution. We have the technical means to do awful things, and we're absolutely stuck about 125,000 years ago in our old lizard brain. And in that sense, it doesn't matter what Jesus said or didn't say. Now, I'm not saying that's my view, but I would have liked to have asked Beth Allison Barr that, in terms of who cares whether Paul wasn't as misogynistic as he seems to be? Who cares whether Jesus was nice to women? Let's deal with the facts on the ground of what this movement represents, and not a rosy vision of what Jesus really meant. So that is, I think, the biggest question. I think your book is very brilliant because you've actually done the job of showing that there's a version of Christianity that would be worth taking another look at for someone looking at it. But I don't think you've answered the fact that it seems inherently to always go off the rails. And one individual saying, look, there's a better way, I don't think offers signposts. So that's a much bigger question than just what's the book about. But I really respect you, and I'd love you to really riff on this now.
Yeah, so there's a couple things we need to bring up. I mean, first of all, the word Christianity is loaded. So when you say Christianity, we think of certain concepts. And what I'm saying in my book is get those concepts out of your head, because Christianity, the way we think of it, did not exist until 200 years or so after Jesus. So it's a totally different animal. And then the other thing is that, like you said, well, what good is it to go back and see what the original meaning of Jesus' teachings or the original communities were like? And, one of the things about that, what I'm saying is that actually the original meaning of Jesus' movement was universalistic, was very progressive, was bringing in some ideas that the world needed to know at that time. And I make the argument we still need to hear that. And it's a completely different animal. It is not what we think of Christianity. It's like, so for example, I'll give examples about people who I think are following what I call the love ethic of Jesus, and they're not even Christians. They're not. They're secular. They're Muslims. I give an example of a Muslim couple, a Jewish couple, a secular black man who won over Ku Klux Klansmen and so forth. So I think there needs to be a paradigm shift. We just think so much in these boxes of what we think Christianity is and what Jesus was really trying to do. He wasn't trying to set up a new religion either. So, if you just look at his teachings as principles of how to live a life, how to and realize it's really a way of life he's talking about, and you apply that to any realm of life, in religion or outside religion, you can live that life without calling yourself a Christian, or you can have those ethics in all kinds of realms. So I think that's the way I could try to share it, is like, as I say in the book, I'm not saying, hey, we figured it out, we're going to have a new denomination. Yeah, and this is the denomination of the original meaning of the Jesus movement. I'm not saying that. I'm saying let's look at the ethics that Jesus is teaching. Recognize that in our violent world, this is a good message. This is good news for a lot of people too. And so we have to look at it that way, not as and that's one of the things is there's so many misconceptions. as soon as you say good news, people are thinking, oh yeah, good news that Jesus died for our sins and we don't have to go to hell or something. Well, that's not what he meant in my mind. It's like he was talking about the good news for a society that, hey, you know, all of you people who are poor, oppressed, and marginalized, God's on your side. God is love and merciful. He wants an egalitarian society. He doesn't want all this class and wealth and affluence and corruption, etc. And so, you know, there just, when you get that in your, get the false definitions of these things out of your head and start to walk in the first century and figure and realize what was going on, then you can see, if we applied that today, it wouldn't be a religion. It wouldn't be Christianity the way we know it at all. It would be a way of life, and you don't even have to call yourself a Christian to walk on that path. If that makes sense.
Yeah, I have one. I'm going to ask you another real question, but as a footnote here, did you ever run into Jack Sparks, a guy he was on the cover of Life magazine baptizing people in swimming pools in the 1970s in San Francisco?
I don't remember Jack Sparks. No, I don't remember him.
Yeah, he kind of the grandfather of the Jesus movement, because he came out of L'Abri in the mid 70s.
Oh, he did. Okay.
Then he went to San Francisco and started baptizing hippies in swimming pools. And then all of a sudden, Life magazine decided this was a Jesus movement. But you were talking about some interaction with the Jesus movement. I wondered if
right. Yeah. Well, I mean, like the Jesus movement, you know, kind of started in California, I guess, but then it went into it morphed into Calvary Chapel, the Vineyard movement, and I was in the Vineyard. Yeah. And, you know, I went to that that Jesus festival in 72. I went to another one in 79. And those were kind of like, you know, the 70s Jesus movement, where it was kind of hip and cool to be a born again Christian. And even Bob Dylan was for a while. I mean, it was like. Well,
then the Vineyard became its own thing and kind of had a lot of, like all these other movements, had some attendance scandal and this, that, and the other. You know, it always cycled through. Let me get back to the bigger point you're making, you know, and talk about the way I see it and just get your reaction to that. It's not a question of do you agree or something. I'm just interested. You know, it seems to me upon reflection that the only reason Jesus's words have any resonance whatsoever is for a completely different reason than people ascribe to Jesus, as if somehow he was prophetic and this was a new teaching, and if we follow this, we're going to live differently than other people. And that is that in making a study of evolution a little bit in the last 15, 20 years, and reading quite a bit about human behavior and neuropsychology and this kind of thing, just from the point of view of trying to, again, coming out of that background and trying to get my feet on actual solid ground, some actual facts for a change. One thing that's become very interesting to me in the last 15 years is that there's a whole school of thought out there saying, you know, Darwin was misinterpreted, talk about Jesus misinterpreted, because it never was about the survival of the fittest. It was always about the survival of the friendliest. And whether you look at dogs or humans, primates, bonobo as opposed to gorillas, that the tribes, if you want to put it this way, and the species themselves depend entirely upon cooperation, and not on who hits you hardest, takes your food. It's the opposite. It's the consoling behavior of wolves and dogs within their own pack to somebody injured. That's the reason that they're a very strong species. The fact that tribal people in the Kalahari were doing what they did for 80,000 years because they managed to have a very egalitarian society in which women had a voice, and hunter-gatherers depended on the fact that the big guy didn't take all the stuff, that it was shared and cooperation. And the success of the human species, to the degree that it's survived in spite of everything, is due to cooperation, not anything else. It's our ability to be friendly and socialize, which fits in very well with what you're saying.
Yeah.
But it seems to me that the teaching of Jesus resonates only because it reflects something far more basic than a prophetic voice. And that is, it reflects the reality of what evolution itself has taught us, not as a spiritual form of life, but as an actual survival tactic, which is the basic selection method of evolution of who survives and who doesn't. And it's those who are cooperative and can live with other people, which is, the argument for the peace movement as well, by the way. But coming from my background, with my dad always making an apologetic for Christianity, where it worked. Oh, this further proves, that we on the right track and these secular people are all wrong. That whole thing.
Yeah, right.
I think that, in my head, it was a revelation that wouldn't have been if I'd come from a secular background, but just the idea that evolution itself has certain truths in it in terms of who we actually are as humans and what resonates with us. And so I think, to me anyway, that's a better argument than ethical teaching, even if I agree with somebody's ethical teaching. And that is, there's a bigger argument for this, and it's called reality.
Yeah, well, I mean, as I make the point in some of the narratives of the book, I think that Jesus was, one of the things he was trying to say was, hey, you're not going to survive if you live this way. You need to be more cooperative. You need to be more loving. You need to put down the sword and be restorative rather than retributive. You need to start loving your enemies. And because if you go on this path, and that's when he's talked about judgment, and the cases that he was talking about, what was going to transpire in the first century, and ended up happening from about 67 to 71 or 72 CE. So, yeah, I remember, having a conversation with you about this earlier, and I said, oh, there's another book that brings this out, and I reference it in my book, and I can't remember what it is offhand, but that notion that, yes, cooperation, not fighting over things, but actually using a community to help each other, et cetera, that's what brings survival and thriving and to our society. And that's kind of along the same lines as Jesus's teachings, and not, so that, because if you don't do that, his history is proven to us over and over again. There's cycles of violence and destruction, and over and over again. So I definitely would agree with that narrative. I just think that was one of the things that Jesus was referring to.
Yeah, just the reality itself. And I think that's a good point you've just made. I just want to reintroduce you. This is In Conversation with Frank Schaeffer. I am Frank Schaeffer. My guest is Michael Camp, who's a friend of mine. And his forthcoming book is Breaking Bad Faith. We're talking about the kind of philosophical issues and theology that come out of having read it. I just finished it this morning before interviewing him, and the fact that we're talking about all this stuff means this is what happens when you read his book. If you want to have a real discussion,
fresh on your mind,
read the book. That's what's on my mind. Let me get into a part of your book that I found very specifically kind of interesting, and you did such a terrific job in it. And that is, and I forget the conclusion you drew, but the stark difference between this kind of angry, vengeful, God demanding sacrifice in the Old Testament and just our ideas of a deity, and the vision of Christ's teaching. I wonder how you then look at Judaism. I wonder how you look at the Old Testament. In fact, I wonder how you look at Islam, though you're talking about a friend of yours who identifies as Islamic, but is living in this way that you feel is more Christian than Christian in some sense. It just seems to me that the Abrahamic tradition, whether it's Islamic or as it manifests within Christianity, say through Calvinist theology, which is sort of our version of Wahhabist Islam, or Islam itself, and girls being persecuted and killed in Afghanistan if they seek an education now, etc. How do you see the non-Christian traditions of the Abrahamic religion, or even other faiths altogether? Because I think if you read your section on the Old Testament, the logical conclusion is, look, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, and you do not say this in your book, but in a way, I think you're kind of doing the opposite of Jefferson, who went through Jesus's teaching and cut out the bits he didn't like in terms of miracles, you're going through the entire narrative of Abrahamic, not just Judaism, but how Christianity manifests. And I think it would apply to Islam as well, if we're honest about it. And just saying, except for these few paragraphs we have, which is all we've got if you condense it, spoken by this person we're calling Jesus, not much in here means anything. And a lot of it is straight up evil horror. And you go through the passages of the Old Testament basically in a way that would have been interpreted, say, by my father as just anti-Christian and so forth, and just say, yeah, but look how different this is to the teaching of Jesus. Do you want to just address some of this?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, so first of all, Judaism, we have to think about that first, because they're the ones that produce what we call the Bible.
Right.
And the problem that we have today is we've been programmed, brainwashed to think of the Bible as black and white or all or nothing. So it's either all true and inerrant and fallible, or it's not reliable at all. And the Bible doesn't really say anything. There are different authors who say things. There are different narratives that say things that happen to be in the Bible. So, for example, you say, well, yeah, what about, how do you reconcile all these things? Well, I clearly say we should reject the violent narratives in the Old Testament. And why is that? Well, because the Jewish people had a history of debating what they thought was from God and what wasn't. Even the Bible itself critiques itself. The prophets critique the sacrificial system. And they clearly did, when you look at it with an open mind. They actually changed narratives from, like, say, I don't know, 1 Samuel or something, when the writer of 1 Chronicles would change things and say, oh, no, they got that wrong, I'm going to change it, And you can clearly see all this, but we're in this mindset of you have to accept it all or nothing. And so what I'm saying is, wait a minute, I don't even think the Jewish people looked at the Bible that way. That's why you had the Sadducees only accepted the Torah, and other people accepted the writings and the prophets, and other people accepted 14 books from the Greek Septuagint that didn't wind up in our Protestant new Bibles, but they thought those were scriptures. And the Essenes had all these other scriptures out of the Dead Sea Scrolls that they thought. One of them, First Enoch, was quoted in the book of Jude. So at the time, there's a whole, the scripture was very fuzzy at the time, and people were debating it. And that's the way we should approach it, because actually that's what Jesus did. He came in and said, oh, yeah, you believe in reciprocal violence? No, you should love your enemies. You believe that there are times when you should not have mercy and go kill your enemies? No, God is actually, you've got it all wrong. And so, God is merciful, if that's his nature. And so what I'm trying to do is bring out those differences. And a lot of times we can't see that because we've been programmed to think, oh, the Bible is all true, or it's all unreliable, whatever. So I try to get people to think in a different way about the Bible. And then when you do that, you can realize that, oh, there's some narratives in there, even in the Old Testament, because, the prophets did say, hey, in these cases, you don't have to do sacrificial religion to please God. You just need to, like the prophet Micah said, act justly, love mercy, and be humble. and that's good enough. And Jesus quoted Hosea, I desire mercy, not sacrifice. And so there are these narratives, counter narratives. You might say there's myths in the Bible and there's counter myths. And there's, what I say is my book is like a religious crap detector.
Yeah.
And we're gonna uncover what the bullshit is, and then uncover what the gold is.
Yeah, and of course, one thing your book is doing is opening that as a possibility for other people, even saying, hey, maybe I've got it wrong here, but you've got to take this, you've got to come to these writings and teachings and traditions with this attitude, so that it's one of questioning and trying to sort through. I want to change the subject a little bit here, because you think about these things, and I'd like your opinion. It seems to me that aside from the rise of a very ugly, violent Christian nationalist politics in America with Trump and all the rest of it, that this is not really a problem just of the US, but globally, we're in a time now when what I thought was going to happen in the middle of the 20th century as a young man being told by my parents, I guess, that we were going into a battle with secularism we were probably going to lose.
Yeah.
The world is more religious now than at any other time, everywhere. Even the nuns in America, NONE, who don't go to church, are into crystals and witchcraft and tarot cards and God knows what. They all call themselves spiritual, but not religious, blah, 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 blah. And then India, Hindu nationalism's on the rise as a political movement with a 70% approval rating by Indian voters of a guy who basically wants to destroy every mosque in India and drive the Muslims out if he had his way. The Chinese Communist Party is now delving back into traditional Chinese teaching to try to find legitimacy for their secular atheist view, but nevertheless encouraging ancestor worship again.
Oh, right.
Tradition. Saudi Arabia, is this force for a radical kind of Islam, or at least staying in power. What I'm trying to ask you is how does your book enlighten us in some way, not just about the politics of hate and these other things that we see in the Republican Party today, but we're in the middle of a global phenomenon in which the rise of fundamentalist Christianity is, for instance, a tool that Putin is using in an alliance with the Russian Orthodox Church to attack Ukraine in the name of kind of a greater Christendom, right, where he's representing, quote, Christian values, anti-gay, anti-trans, and he's wrapping himself not in the American flag, but he's wrapping himself in traditional historic Christianity, as he would pitch it, and giving this as a reason why he's, seeking to invade Ukraine, etc. Who would have thunk? I mean, in the mid-20th century, it was going to all be secular atheists and scientists running things, and we Christians were this persecuted minority. Our faith was being mocked. But it actually has turned out that, the side that I used to be on put Trump in the White House and still believes he's president. And the Russian people are supporting Vladimir Putin because he speaks to them standing next to Archbishop Kirill with the blessing of the church.
Yeah, I mean, the church has always been used. If you go back and you realize that the institutional church was created to control people. Okay, so these people are just using the church to control people. They're just figuring out a way to change the narrative or whatever, so that it would back what they're trying to do and get more people on board. So I think you see that throughout history. I think Hitler tried to get the church to say some things that would get people on board. But I mean, the phenomenon or the story of how God works in the world, if we believe in God, is a mystery. And I say that the God probably works outside church more than he works inside church, because church is problematic, and I get into that. It's like, you can have a church that's good. There are some good churches out there, but if you're not careful, church is used as a tool to control people. It becomes more important than loving people. So you have to defend the reputation of the church over, helping kids who are sexually abused in the church or whatever the issue is or case is. So I don't really put too much stock in institutional churches. I mean, it's just, they've failed over and over again. And even though there are some exceptions, and, it's good to look at some of those exceptions, but I think the story of how God works in the world is outside church more than inside church for that reason. And that's why I bring up these examples of people who have kind of caught this love ethic, like the Muslim couple who won over an Iraq war veteran who had hated Muslims because he came back from the war in Iraq, having fought them for several years or whatever, and wanted to blow up a mosque. And this Muslim couple and all the leaders of the mosque just showed him kindness, dignity, and love. And he got won over. And, even though he didn't, quote, become a Christian, this had nothing to do with Christianity. It had to do with the way of life of loving people. And that's what Jesus taught. And if you take Jesus outside the religious mindset, I think you can apply it to any group, whether they're religious or whether it's another religion or something outside religion, if that makes sense.
You were a missionary in Africa, in Islamic countries, and you're here in the U.S. now in a political moment that you never would have foreseen unless you're clairvoyant, which is the post-Trump era.
I know.
And the kind of, living in a time when QAnon and all the rest, which you mentioned in your book, by the way, I think it's brilliant the way you tie in the whole conspiracy milieu we're in and fake news and so forth with this argument of yours in terms of holding out Christ's teaching as something different than the religious teaching and the mythology that we live in. So, the point you make in your book that I think is excellent is that, this is not a problem that's unique to Christianity or religion per se. This is a human problem. So, our worst instincts of grasping for various mythologies, which now we call conspiracy theories and so forth, this is not unique to the faith you come out of. Right.
Yeah. So, conspiracy theories have always been around. And you could argue that the myths or frauds that I point out in the book, most of them really are like conspiracy theories, right? Like the end times, last days, we're in the last days, and all that stuff.
Well, and they've melded with current conspiracy theories.
Yes, and the woman I met who was a QAnon follower who thought JFK Jr. was going to be Trump's running mate in 2020. She also had one of those last days rapture type books. And says, oh, yeah, you should read this, too, because this really will tie into everything I'm telling you. And this is a sign of the last days and Jesus is coming back and all that stuff. So Christians have always believed these conspiracy theory type things. And when QAnon or the Trump era comes around and says, hey, don't believe what you hear on the news, they fit right in. Oh, yeah, we've been told that for years. Don't believe the secular mainstream media. Don't believe the liberals and the Democrats and anyone who's not really one of us. You just can't trust them. So they just buy into it.
Yeah, they have, speaking of grooming, just the whole evangelical mentality grooms people from birth, basically, to see the world as outside and lost. And we're the chosen, and we have our own truth. So whatever your science teacher's teaching you, this is what the book of Genesis says, and this is what we believe.
Exactly.
And that dichotomy, that kind of split vision, you by the time you're 3 years old, raised in a Christian family, you're thinking that way.
No, it's true. The brainwashing is absolutely amazing. It's I call it the us versus them mentality and approach to life, and it's in everything, and it kind of infects all the doctrines that they believe too. So we're going to go to heaven, they're going to go to hell. We're regenerated by the Spirit. They're not. They're still depraved worms of people who, God will only forgive them if they jump through the right religious hoops, etc. So it's crazy. The whole world is looked on in black and white, and I argue that this is outrageous misinterpretation, sometimes mistranslations of biblical terms, but just a misinterpretation of what Jesus and even Paul was saying. Not that not that everything that Paul said was perfect or whatever, but just the it's amazing to me how far off the trail they go when you try to look at the original Jesus movement in the shoes of people who actually lived there and experienced all the things that were going around them. And then this guy, Jesus, peasant named Jesus, shows up and says, hey, actually, the poor are really more important than the rich guys. All these things that were very radical things to say. And they've just gotten completely away from that part of the teachings.
But I have a question. You talk a little bit about charismatic Christianity, and it just seems the leading edge of a lot of this harsher view now comes from Pentecostal background. And of course, there's a new wrinkle, and that is people talk about white Christian nationalism, but there's a huge Hispanic contingent now that is as harsh and as retributive in orientation towards a kind of an Old Testament angry God. And, the view of this movement is, well, yes, Jesus said all those things, but right now we're in this battle to the death with the spirit of secularism. And so, yes, we'll love our enemies at some point, but right now we're buying another AR-15 and stocking 1,000 rounds of ammunition because there's a bloodbath coming and we need to fight for God's kingdom on earth.
It's crazy. Yeah.
I mean, how do you see that? Because I ask you a point blank question as an observer of this movement. Your book is Breaking Bad Faith. Well, part of it is to unpack the mythology so we understand it better. Where is this all going to go? I mean, are we on our way to violent confrontations with gun-toting NRA/biblical Christians, or are the biblical Christians going to go away and just replaced by good old-fashioned fascists? What's happening here? Because I think at a certain point, you get so far away from even the evangelical narrative that you address that you're into territory which doesn't reference at all. In other words, you're talking to a lot of right-wing people who really don't give a damn what Jesus said or how he was interpreted, because they're way past that now. It's not like, what did Jesus really mean? Jesus schmeezus. We are now arming ourselves for a civil war.
Yeah.
What do you think?
I think, unfortunately, that's true, that people are so ingrained and programmed to think this way of a violent and following a violent, retributive God, and putting aside Jesus's contradictions to that, and justifying it in various ways, either sometimes through scripture or sometimes just through politics or whatever. But and those people are just completely lost. And I don't think anyone would pick up my book and say, "Oh, I'm going to break my bad faith here."
Yeah.
But I'm not trying to reach those people. But one of the things I bring out in my Religious Deconstruction Workshop is you got to remember, people are on different tracks and journeys and stages in life. Okay. So you can find people in the evangelical deconstruction community who used to be crazy like that. You can find that example just gave, that Iraq war veteran wanted to blow up the mosque. You can find people who were really in that violent stream, and then they changed. So I think there's hope for everyone. But some people probably won't change in this lifetime. But I think that just the fact that there are so many evangelicals, charismatics, conservative Christians that are deconstructing Christianity and starting to and more being vocal about it is just a sign that things can change. And I tend to be an optimist. I hope that's going to eventually, a generation from now, we'll see more fruit from that. I think the Trump era was a real big disappointment, just huge. All these, especially some of my former friends in the evangelical church, became Trump supporters, and I'm like, what the hell is going on? And but I also see some conservative Christians, like my wife. I think she's deconstructed to some degree, but she's still, in some ways, still conservative in her Christianity, even though she doesn't go to church anymore. But she always rejected Trump, So I mean, there's always people who are in a movement. They're not monolithic, is what I'm trying to say. So there's differences within that. Although the bulk of evangelicals did support Trump, not everyone did.
Well, they still do.
And they still do. Yes. I meant in the first, the elections, but yeah, that's true. And but people are in different stages of let's say life and spiritual journeys. And so someone who's really entrenched in, I don't know, in conservative Christianity now, who's to say that 10 years from now they'll still be like that?
Well, hey, you're looking at one.
Yeah, you and me.
If you, I was talking to a journalist.
Right. So we have to, sometimes we have to kind of be I still have very conservative Christian friends and family that I have to be extremely patient with, and I have to draw boundaries sometimes because it's like, nope, that's enough. I can't go there. I'm not going to engage with you on that. But I still have to, live life and try to love them and engage with them. Mm-hmm. And hope that maybe one day they'll see some they'll see the light of what's going on and change. But you don't know. We don't know how people will what stage they're in and what's really going on. And sometimes I'll meet people who tell me, oh yeah, I've been questioning. I just met a woman who, I mean, I didn't meet her. I used to be friends with her back in California when we were in a charismatic church in Pasadena, California, and her husband is really in the thick of the charismania movement, all this fasting and prayer for revival, supporting Trump and all this stuff, and our former pastor is still a Trump supporter and all this stuff. But that woman, when she heard some of my ideas, she's like, you know what? I tend to agree with you. I've had some trouble with that. I've had, and I'm willing to read your book. And so those are the people that, I didn't know. I would have never guessed that she would be like that. But There are some people that they keep their deconstruction light, or they keep it under the radar, and they don't really tell their husband and their family what's really going on.
It's a good point not to give up. In Conversation with Frank Schaeffer is what you are listening to. I'm Frank Schaeffer. My guest is Michael Kemp. Michael's new book is Breaking Bad Faith, and he goes through a lot of stuff, the mythology of our own moment, from QAnon to the way we interpret the Old Testament, the teaching of Jesus in contrast, and his interpretation of what Jesus really was driving at. Couple of things here. Please like and subscribe to this podcast, In Conversation with Frank Schaeffer. And you can follow me in all the usual places like Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, etc. I'm on Instagram at Frank Schaeffer Art. And my Substack is called It Has to Be Said. If you would please subscribe to all those things. Charismania, 3 exclamation marks. He came up with a good term, charismania. Ernie, my producer, loves it. I would just say anybody who wants to be in touch with Michael or order the book, we're going to have links to you and anything you want people to link to, wherever this shows up, Michael. So just tell our producer, Ernie, what you would like to have.
Sure. Yeah.
Link to you and how to buy the book and make it easy. Any other material you want to share with our audience, we will put up wherever this is shown. And likewise, I hope you share this interview with folks so that they can hear about your book.
Yeah,
I just want to finish up. We have a couple minutes, and I'd like one more substantial question, and that is, when you finish this book, I won't ask it, who did you write this for? But in the best of all worlds, what kind of people will read this book? You talked about this woman who will now read the book. She's on her way to perhaps changing her views. Who do you picture as your ideal reader for this book?
Well, first of all, those who are deconstructing or either they're in the process of deconstructing or they have deconstructed conservative Christianity.
Do me one favor and define what you mean by deconstructing.
Oh, deconstructing meaning someone who's questioning their conservative Christian faith and starting to do some research, starting to read alternate and trying to get a better study of history. There's a lot of bullshit out there about what really happened in Christian history. So reading better stories of history, more accurate, doing more research on even the Bible in biblical terms, translations, reading people's stories, just logically thinking through all these doctrines that don't make sense, like substitutionary atonement or infallibility of the Bible, and then tearing that down and finding what's more probably true or what's more definitely true, and then trying to rebuild something.
Talk about this teaching role you have with, you were talking about when you teach certain things, what are these things you do besides writing?
Well, I have a deconstruction workshop, and I hope to develop some more courses. So that's kind of like a 6-hour course in 6 sessions about what I've learned deconstructing evangelicalism, and what are some of the facts that people need to really learn. Like when you deconstruct the Bible, which is a huge one, and I go through that in the workshop. What do you really need to learn to deconstruct the Bible? First of all, you have to learn how the Bible was compiled. So they don't teach you that in Sunday school, or they don't have a sermon on that. And
yeah, they take it as a magic book that somehow just arrived.
Yeah, right. They just arrived, just accept it, right? All scripture is God breathed. It's right there in the Bible. You can't question that. And so I go through, well, actually look at history, find out how the Bible was compiled, and you will walk away and go, oh my gosh, this is not what I was thinking, So that's part of it, history, logic. I also go into how to overcome religious trauma. And, I was clinically depressed for 3 or 4 years as I was starting to deconstruct. And what saved my ass was cognitive behavioral therapy. And you can use that in deconstruction because there's a lot of voices in people's heads. You're afraid of hell because you're doubting hell. It's like, how do you overcome that? Well, you can use cognitive behavioral therapy. And I go and give some examples of that. I also met a really interesting guy who was a former fundamentalist, and he became a professor of philosophy at the University of Washington. And he uses what's called if-then logic. And I go through some examples of that. So like just helping people with these tools that can help them overcome some of the trauma that they've had experienced, or some of the fear that just keeps lingering around. Sometimes it takes years for people to overcome that fear because they've just been in.
Yeah, one of our guests has made a life work of this. Marlene Winnell, who's a PhD neuropsychologist, and we interviewed her, and we have references to Marlene's work and website and so forth. People can listen to that podcast and look up Marlene, because she talks about the trauma of coming out of all this, and very similar things to what you're saying. So there's a lot of material out there. Well, we're going to encourage people to get in touch with you, take the course, buy the book. All success with the book. July 4th, it's coming out. Come back and we'll talk about it some more and see how it all went. But
on Amazon. On Amazon, July 4th. Yeah,
exactly. For July 4th, it goes on sale. So, Michael, thank you so much for your time, and all the best to the book. And I thought it was an excellent read. So I hope people delve in and start doing some of this deconstruction work of yours for themselves, but also just benefit from this incredible wealth of knowledge you bring to the table, of both life experience and the research you've done and the study you've done. I think it's really very well put together.
Well, thank you. I really appreciate the opportunity to be in conversation with you. This is great.
Good.
I have, since I've read a lot of your books and understand your background, I feel like we have an affinity, even though we haven't spent that much time together. So,
well, I felt the same thing going through your book. It was like, oh yeah, I understand, totally get this. So, and if there's enough other people out there like that, you're going to find some readers. So,
yeah, good. Okay.
Yeah. All right, Michael. Thank you.
All right. Thank you.
Okay, bye.